Drew Coat Sports Talk is powered by StreamYard. Want to take your podcast to the next level? Use StreamYard. It's the easiest way to record, stream, or produce high-quality episodes, whether you're solo or with guests. Plus, when you sign up today, you'll get a $10 credit to get started. Use the link in our bio. Don't miss out. StreamYard is your key to seamless podcasting. So we're going to go over week 6's what did we learn? So what I want to do with this segment is I want to go over each game of week 6, and I want to talk about what we learned from each team, whether they won or they lost, and essentially report to you what I'm seeing when I see these games and what it's telling me, and then report to what we learned. So the first one we're going to lead off with is the 49ers went to Seattle on Thursday Night Football, and the Seahawks fell to the Niners. And as a quick reminder, the Niners had lost their last 2 divisional games to the Rams and the Cardinals in the same fashion. Fourth quarter late leads that they held that the Rams and the Cardinals overcame to ultimately win the game. And so the Niners, it looks like, got back on track with the 36-24 victory in Seattle, which is pretty huge. And I think what we learned from the Niners is don't doubt the talent on this team, regardless of the injuries. I said in a bold prediction that I was not sure if they were going to be able to make the playoffs and that they were going to go through this injury bug. They went through the middle of it. They lost Deebo Samuel for a short time. They had the contract situation, Brandon Ayuk, who had a very, very slow start. Obviously, as everyone knows, Christian McCaffrey is still out, and we still don't know when he will return. For a short period of time, Trent Williams was out with an injury. And of course, they've suffered injuries on the defensive side of the ball. Regardless of that, though, they are now 3-3, and they are still looking like they are the best team in the NFC West. And I think what we can say is coaching is Kyle Shanahan is working overtime right now to make sure that this team is ready to go and competitive. Their losses, though, to certain teams that they should have beaten is the concerning part. Losing to the Vikings, understandable. They have the number 1 defense in the NFL. Losing to the Rams and the Cardinals, who by all accounts are the lesser of the Niners, to then give up fourth quarter leads to be defeated by them is huge. And for them to get a victory in their division over Seattle is a huge thing. And what we learned from Seattle is they're not quite there yet. I know that there was a question that maybe that they were going to be a competitive NFC team, and they are in some respect. But you put them up against an NFC dominant team, one that's injury riddled, we'll say. They still weren't able to move the ball that effectively. They fell behind very quickly, and they just had a hard time getting out of it. Geno Smith, I think, is a good quarterback. He fits the system, but I think Seattle is just not quite there yet to be like a playoff team. Like, could they sneak into the wild card? Yeah, potentially. But now with, let's say, the Niners take over the NFC West, you've got the NFC North, who we'll talk about shortly, who has 4 teams. All 4 of their teams are 2 games above 500 that could very easily take the final 3 wildcard spots just because of better record and better play than the Seahawks, who may miss it based on a couple of games. So I think that's something that we learned is Seattle's just not quite there yet. What did we learn with the Chargers and the Broncos? Chargers, like I had said earlier, comparing them to the Jets, are a sleeper in the AFC, especially in the West. I don't think that they are a team that's going to be able to get over the top of the Chiefs, but I think they're like maybe a couple of offensive pieces away from being up there with they are, one, a really run dynamic team, which they already proved now, and that they have a viable number 1 option when it comes to throwing the ball, which it seems like every team needs. It's really hard to have a receiving core by committee and be effective. You might need that one receiver that teams have to game plan for to open it up for everything else. So the Chargers, in my opinion, are a sleeper team in terms of like maybe getting a wild card berth and being a force to be thought of in the AFC. What we learned from the Broncos is, yes, they've had some good wins against the Jets, and they had some good wins. Obviously, they blew out the Raiders last week. They're just not quite there yet. Bo Nix, I think, is the quarterback for the future, which he is showing. This team, just outside their defense, they really don't have much going for them offensively, and I think that that's what they're missing to be a relevant team again. Are they on the right track? Sure, but they're just not there yet, as what I'm sure Bronco fans are hoping to hear. What did we learn from the Steelers and the Raiders? What we learned from the Steelers is they're a very good football team, and the fact that they're entertaining changing their starting quarterback to Russell Wilson is outrageous. I think if you really want to tank someone's confidence in Justin Fields, who has proven that he is a
good quarterback for them and has played them into positions of winning games and has done really well, this would shake his confidence if you put Russell Wilson in there, because there's nothing that says that Russell Wilson is going to make you that much better or going to take you over the top. Like, sure, he has more years in the NFL and he's a former Super Bowl champion, but he didn't have the last 2 years that he was in Denver was not the greatest. And now you bring him into a situation with the Steelers. If he does overtake the starting role for Justin Fields, just doesn't make any sense. And what we learned from the Raiders is, an option to tank is on the table. And we are still hurting ourselves when it comes to dumb penalties. We didn't get penalized as much in this game, but the penalties caused us field position. It caused us points. We didn't protect the ball like we were supposed to. We turned it over 3 times, one of those being an interception, a couple of fumbles as well, which gave opportunity to the Steelers. And the Raiders just have a lot to clean up. And Antonio Pierce is going to have to answer some tough questions and make some tough decisions, business decisions to keep the Raiders relevant. And the question of how competitive do they want the Raiders to be this season, I think, is on the table. Bengals and Giants, what did we learn? We learned that the Giants are a quarterback away from being a threat in the NFC. That defense is really, really good. So good. Brian Daboll is a extremely good coach. And the Giants defense does not feel like a 2-4 team, but that offense, though, feels like it. And last week, the Giants played really well. That came out with a victory. Brian Daboll and Daniel Jones looked really good in that game, but Daniel Jones in this game at home on primetime just didn't look good. Now, granted, they didn't have Malik Neighbors, who's their new rookie wide receiver, who is an absolute unit, and he is going to be special for them for many, many years to come. Sure, they didn't have him, but you can just see that this team is kind of being held back by Daniel Jones. And then what do we learn from the Bengals? They have such a talented roster on the offensive side of the ball, and their defense just is going to probably be their weakest part. And I think it's a little bit too late. Granted, they did get a victory, so now they're 2-4, and maybe they can build some momentum. But the fact that they start late they have a slow start at the start of the season to where in October is when they start getting, wins and stuff, makes it really hard, because now in the division that they're at, where you have the Steelers and you have the Ravens being ultra competitive, and you're 2 games behind both of them respectively, you've got to now make up a ton of ground. And I just don't know if the Bengals are going to be able to do it in enough time. They're going to get close, I think. But I think what makes it tough is Zach Taylor every season gets them off into a position to start the season where they're playing from behind every week. And I think that this is probably his final year, short of them getting to the Super Bowl or to an AFC championship game. I just don't see him lasting after this season with how the team has looked. And part of that is the defensive side of the ball as well. Like defense clearly lets down the Bengals. Unfortunately, they won this game, but I mean, in my opinion, the Bengals are a much better offensive team than this, and they should be a better team than 2-4. What did we learn from the Jaguars and the Bears? For the Bears, Caleb Williams is looking a lot more comfortable. This offense is humming, and now that they're 2-4 in a very competitive NFC North game, they're on a bye week this week. The following week, they play the Washington Commanders. That's going to be a really fun game to watch, because you've got Jaden Daniels and you've got Caleb Williams going head-to-head. That'll be a fun matchup to watch. Bears are a sneaky good team, a team that, could go further along and maybe continue to play in the colder months wherein it's playoff time. I mean, it's a possibility if they keep playing like this. But again, some of the teams that they have played haven't been very good. So we'll see when they come up with some, again, competition to see how that's going to look. With the Jags, I think Doug Peterson's going to be let go after their second game in London, or they're going to play in London on Sunday. In my opinion, they're going to let go of Doug Peterson then. The reason why they haven't let go of him now is because they're not on a plane ride back to America. And as soon as that happens, Doug Peterson's no longer going to be the coach. The Jags, what we learned is they need to hit the reset button. Having that extension on Trevor Lawrence sure was probably the smart move to do, but he played an okay game. But this offense is completely underwhelming, and this team just needs to hit a full reset. They need to start all over again. They need someone different a different voice out there because they're just not responding to Doug Peterson. And Doug Peterson right now, there's nothing that he can do that's going to not lose him his job. Like he's not going to be the coach after next week. That's almost a certainty. What do we learn from the Cardinals and the Packers game? Cardinals aren't as good as we thought they were. They're a tough out. They have a lot of identity problems when it comes to the offense. Defense is non-existent, and they have a lot to still work on to build and be competitive. But for now, they're just a team that might get you if you don't respect them. And what we learned from the Packers, they are an NFC threat. And in my opinion, they are a team that, could rival the Detroit Lions, and we'll find out when they play each other again. But the Packers are a very good team. Jordan Love throwing for 4 touchdowns is absolutely ridiculous. And this team is very, very good. Matt LaFleur, who was able to keep this team afloat during Jordan Love's absence, is a testament to how good his coaching is. And this offense is moving the ball very, very well. Colts and Titans, what do we learn? Both subpar teams. Colts having a 3-3 record to me doesn't mean anything. Joe Flacco should have been re-signed with the Browns, but for some reason they just weren't interested in being relevant. And the Colts were able to come from behind essentially and beat the Titans. And really, this doesn't do anything in the world of the NFL. For the Titans, they know that Will Levis isn't the quarterback of the future. They might want to think about drafting another one, which is funny because they drafted Will Levis because they didn't believe in Malik Willis, who Malik Willis won 2 games with the Packers when he was filling in for them. One of those actually against the Titans. So that's what we learned. What do we learn with the Texans and Patriots? For the Patriots, they have the franchise quarterback. Drake May threw for 3 touchdowns, looked very good. They just went against the best team in the AFC in the Texans. So, of course, they're just not up to par quite yet. And what we learned from the Texans is they can lean on Stephon Diggs to be the number 1 receiver while Nico Collins is out. They did get back Joe Mixon, so that is a huge help. And this team is a dangerous team in the AFC, as I said earlier in the season. What did we learn between the Buccaneers and the Saints? I think the Saints' 2 games where they blew out their opponents against the Panthers and the Cowboys was probably they just took those teams by surprise. But now that there's film on them, as Drew would love to say, they're kind of being figured out. And then also what makes me nervous is for the Saints, I think if Spencer Rattler, when he goes up against whoever he's competing against on Sunday, if he has another good game where that offense is moving the ball a little bit and they're able to remain competitive, high probability that Derek Carr doesn't get his starting job back. And also, too, if the Saints continue to underperform when they started off hot at 2-0 and they just have lost now the last 4 games, 2 of those 4 games against divisional opponents, I don't think Dennis Allen is going to last. And I'd be hard-pressed to say that Derek Carr is probably going to remain with the team. I wouldn't be surprised if they just stick with Spencer Rattler because he's the younger quarterback, has the stronger arm, and Derek Carr's costed him more money. So Derek Carr might be a trade piece for a team that might be a quarterback away from being relevant if a team feels like that. So I think that's an option that's on the table. What we learned from the Buccaneers is they're a solid team. I don't know if they're on the level of the Falcons, who they lost to in the prior week. But, the Buccaneers are a team that if they can respect their opponents, they will go far. And they are a team that could surprise a lot of people by having a deep run. They have experience on all sides of the ball. So we'll see. I think what we learned from the Buccaneers is, that we need to see them play. When they're playing competition, we need to see them continue to meet those expectations. I think one of their wins that they had against the Lions.
Drew Code Sports Talk is supported by SeatGeek. SeatGeek is your go-to app for tickets, making it super easy to find the best deals. They even rate each ticket deal on a scale of 1 to 10, so you know you're getting your money's worth. And as a special thank you to our listeners, we've got a promo code just for you. Use Drew Code at checkout to get $20 off your first order. That's $20 off your first purchase, whether it's for the game that you've been dying to see or that concert that everybody is talking about. Head over to SeatGeek now, find your perfect seat, and use Drew Code for $20 off your first order. SeatGeek. Get your tickets to the action today.
really put the Buccaneers on the map. So then to have games that they lose to the Falcons in overtime, and you would think that the Buccaneers, coming off of a good win against the Lions, would be able to snap out of it. It's just kind of interesting. So I think them putting up 51 points is great. That offense looks really good. Baker Mayfield and this team is humming, and hopefully they can continue it because they would be an interesting team in the NFC. Browns and Eagles, what do we learn? I think the Browns are tanking. They're just doing it with Deshaun Watson as their quarterback, which is kind of funny because they gave away essentially their future and signed Deshaun Watson to an obscene amount of money, with him being 2 years removed from football and having numerous sexual assault cases, civil suit cases that need to be settled. And the fact that there's a tracker for if he throws more touchdowns than cases settled, and the number of assault cases settled is higher than his throwing touchdowns, that's kind of funny. And that just shows that the Browns, I think, are just tanking on purpose. They're just doing it with Deshaun Watson at starting quarterback. I think if they were to start Jameis Winston, they would start winning. And I think what they're trying to do is tank as much as they can to get a better draft position. My only fear is that Kevin Stefanski is going to look like a bad head coach. And I think he's a better coach than what he's getting credit for. And we need to see, he needs to outlast Deshaun Watson. I don't think Deshaun Watson should be the reason that Kevin Stefanski loses his job, because normally most head coaches that underperform 2 seasons in a row, or in this case 3 seasons nearly, usually the head coach is the first one to go. And I really hope that Kevin Stefanski outlasts this, because Deshaun Watson is the reason this team is falling, not Kevin Stefanski. What did we learn with the Eagles? The Eagles have an immature head coach. For him to clown his home team fans because they were calling for his job because poor coaching and poor management of the team, which that fan base has every right to do. And for him to then be completely immature and bark back at them is obscene. What are you doing? That's your fan base. You want them to be critical of you. You want them to expect greatness. You just went to the Super Bowl 2 seasons ago, and your expectations is to get to the Super Bowl. So if you are losing bad games to teams you shouldn't lose to, and they're calling for your head, yeah, I mean, we all would. And the fact that you're doing that, how immature. In my opinion, Nick Sirianni is probably going to get let go at some point in this season. I don't see him outlasting the end of the season unless the Eagles get on some crazy hot streak where they start riding a win streak of 8 games, and before you know it, by week 12, maybe they're 10-2. Let's say they rattle off 7 in a row now, to where okay, Nick Sirianni can stay. But let's say they go teetering between 500 and under 500. I wouldn't expect Nick Sirianni to stick around, and rightfully so. Andy Reid, one of the greatest coaches of all time, now with the Chiefs, had a career with coaching the Eagles where he led them to 5 consecutive NFC championship games. He was booed when he had bad seasons as well, because again, that fan base felt that team underperformed under his watch. And I think Andy Reid would agree that they didn't perform well, and he got booed for it. Andy Reid, to my knowledge, has never criticized the fan base or done anything this immature where he's barking back at the fan base for them just being vocal about how upset they are because the Eagles are falling below expectations. They just signed Saquon Barkley. They have arguably a top 3 receiver in the game in A.J. Brown, a very good comparable receiver next to him in Devonta Smith, supposedly a very good defense, and you're underperforming. You're 3-2, and you barely beat the Browns, who are the worst team in the NFL, by 4 points. And then you're going to bark at your fan base for calling for your job, which, by the way, if you're doing that, maybe you shouldn't have the job. That's not a great leader quality of Nick Sirianni. Commanders and Ravens, what did we learn? Commanders are almost on the cusp of being a formidable team in the NFC and in the NFL. The only problem is they went against the Ravens. And what did we learn from the Ravens is they are probably the second best, maybe tied for second best team in the AFC. If the Ravens rematched against the Chiefs, who they played in week 1 next week, I think the Chiefs would lose to the Ravens, because the Ravens defense is playing better. I like that defense I like that defense a lot. And also, too, this offense has now found an identity where Lamar Jackson doesn't have to run 20 times and risk injury. He now can throw the ball over 300 yards, get Zay Flowers 9 receptions for 132 yards, hand the ball off to Derrick Henry for 24 times for 132 yards, let him get 2 rushing touchdowns. The last 4 wins that the Ravens have had, the focal point has been getting Derrick Henry the ball and letting Lamar Jackson throw the ball and make smart football decisions. To me, that's a dangerous team. And I think what we learned from the Ravens they are probably tied for second for being the best team in the AFC. The team I would put tying them would be the Houston Texans, because they also have a defense and a very good offense that is hard to stop. Lions and Cowboys, what do we learn? Lions are the best team in the NFC, hands down. I know I just talked about the Commanders. I brought up the Falcons. I brought up the Buccaneers. We brought up 49ers. Cowboys are steps ahead of everyone else. They look like they are, knock on wood, Super Bowl favorites to represent the NFC. Very, very, very good team. Extremely well coached, and they can beat you on all sides. They can run the ball on you. They can throw it deep. They can dump it off to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Their defense is very formidable. This is an all-around great football team, and Detroit has something to be excited about. They are legitimate threats in the NFC to represent the Super Bowl. And that's just fantastic. Jared Goff is playing at an MVP level, and this team is just extremely well coached. Dan Campbell, if he's not the front runner for Coach of the Year, he should be. What do we learn from the Cowboys? Jerry Jones is the problem. This Cowboys team is not as good as what everyone thinks, and Jerry Jones' fragile ego to be questioned by a radio host who he hired for a radio network that he created on his weekly spot that he himself makes time for, because that was the commitment he made when he created this media for the Cowboys, to then get just a couple of hard questions like, what are we going to do for this team, for him to snap and throw a temper tantrum about being held accountable for it. Jerry Jones is the problem why the Cowboys won't ever be relevant or successful. The last time the Cowboys were relevant was when Drew and I were about 4 or 5 years old, and we're in our mid-30s now. So it's been that long. And granted, sure, they've had a couple of postseason appearances, but nothing since then. For as much noise as Cowboy fans do, and as much media attention as ESPN gives the Cowboys, I'd expect them to be a lot better than this. The fact that ESPN bows at the altar of the Cowboys, and the Cowboys are 3-3, and truthfully, they're on the bad side of 3-3, where like they're probably going to win games that they should, and they're probably going to lose games to teams in a blowout fashion like this. Another 40-point game dropped on their head the third time this season. Reminder, week 2, the Saints, in a previous game against the Ravens, and now the Lions. What's up with the Cowboys? I don't know. But what we learned is they're not a good team. Falcons and Panthers, what did we learn? Falcons are still a good team that took care of business. Panthers, what did we learn? We learned that they need to now stop with the Andy Dalton experiment. You clearly know the kind of team that you have. It's not a playoff team. It's an okay team, but it's not a playoff team. So now it's time to get Bryce Young into your starting lineup again, and it's time to coach him up some confidence and get him to be successful, and stop relying on Andy Dalton to be your savior. He's not. He's a very good quarterback. His best years are probably behind him, but you need to get Bryce Young that confidence back. And how do you do that? You got to this season's a loss for the Panthers. Now just play him so you get him that confidence and you coach him up. Let him go through some growing pains. Second year, he should be a little bit improved. Let's get that improvement going. Let's coach that into him. Not just like, oh, we're going to dictate the lineup based on wins. You've won one game, and it was against the Raiders, and the team did look a little bit better with Andy Dalton, sure. But now you guys have dropped your last 2 or 3 games now. Third straight. I think it's the third straight loss that you guys have had. It's time to end the experiment. It's time to get Bryce Young back in there to get his confidence up. What do we learn between the Bills and the Jets, which, by the way, they both yesterday had 2 big receiver transactions. I talked about the Devontae Adams to the Jets, which I thought the Jets didn't really, did they slightly improve? Sure. But I think who won the trade ultimately was the Raiders. And I don't know if Devontae Adams goes to a better situation, respectively, to the Jets with how they are. The Bills, however, did win on Monday Night Football, and what we learned from them is their defense is there. Josh Allen is playing at an MVP level, and even though that they don't have an offensive a number one receiver, this team was able to hunker down, come out with a victory against the Jets. I was desperate. They were hoping to get a victory to get that confidence up, and they didn't. But on the same day, they acquired Amari Cooper from the Cleveland Browns. And early in the season, the Browns had restructured Amari Cooper's deal to be more friendly to be acquired by another team by knocking down, I think, his base salary to like 1 point something million and restructuring his deal to where, like, if he was traded, it would be easier for a team to acquire and it would be more attractive, which was in play for a majority of the season. It was just now, where is Amari Cooper going to go? It was never like, oh, he's going to stick around with the Browns. It was always Amari Cooper's on his way out. Who is he going to get traded to? I was saying that I thought the Chiefs were going to be in the market for getting a number one receiver, which I still think that they should have been. And that's fine if they weren't. The Bills, though, acquired Amari Cooper. So now Amari Cooper arguably has the best quarterback he's ever played with in his career. Amari Cooper is still an elite route runner, and he will draw defenses. So now you have players like Coleman, Shakur, who are both very good receivers, now have that number one threat that's going to garner more defensive attention to open up things. And with how this offensive is, they needed this number one receiver. And to me, the Bills now have exploded to contenders again. I've always thought that they were kind of on the cusp of being pretenders or contenders. Like, they just don't feel like they're there yet. They're missing something. They found that missing piece. And in my opinion, now the Bills are a threat in the AFC. And I think there's some attention that needs to be done on the Bills. They're right there. I think now they are solidifying that they're going to win the East, even if the Bills have acquired Devontae Adams, even if Tua comes back with Miami. The Bills, in my opinion, just solidified that they're going to clinch the East, and they're going to just continue to build upon this, and they're going to be a threat. And not only a threat to the Chiefs, they're going to be a threat to the Texans, who they did lose to earlier this year. They're going to be a threat to the Ravens, who they also lost to earlier this season, because an argument could be made that they didn't have this number one receiver during those pivotal games that could have made a difference for them. Now that they found that difference, let's see what the Bills do. And I think what we learned is they're ready to take a step forward, and now they're looking to be a formidable threat in the AFC. So